The prevailing doctrine fixates on the kinetic arc of a missile. This is a fatal miscalculation. The first strike will not be a fireball. It will be absolute silence. While strategists debate launch-on-warning protocols, the primary vector has already shifted from explosive force to systemic paralysis. Analysts at CSIS and RUSI model this scenario not as a war, but as a systemic takedown. The targets are not cities. They are the undersea fiber optic cables that serve as the neural pathways for 99% of global data and trillions in daily financial transactions. The weapon is not a warhead. It is a deep-sea submersible with a cutting tool. Simultaneously, a non-kinetic attack blinds the satellite constellations. The objective is not to destroy the state, but to create a blind Leviathan, a military superpower with unparalleled kinetic force, but its command and control infrastructure rendered inert. Its digital eyes are blinded. Its financial nervous system is severed. A state cannot execute financial transactions. It cannot pay its soldiers. It cannot target its weapons. For a nation facing systemic collapse from protocols like escalation without collapse, as seen with Iran, this is not a speculative risk. It is the final, asymmetric lever to pull when its own solvency is destroyed. It creates the mathematical certainty for a kinetic response from a state that can no longer see. A state's capacity for war is not measured in warheads. It is measured on a balance sheet. The motive for catastrophic escalation is never strength. It is a solvency crisis. When a nation's ledger bleeds red, when its domestic liabilities exceed its political capital, its strategic calculus shifts from power projection to desperate survival. Consider the pivot to war. Analysis from strategic bodies like CSIS frames major state actions not as geopolitical chess, but as a violent form of financial restructuring. An unpopular war is a catastrophic domestic liability. When the kinetic cost of conventional operations becomes untenable, the state must pivot to asymmetry to manage its internal solvency crisis. This weakness forces the hand. A state teetering on the edge of internal collapse cannot afford a protracted, symmetrical conflict. The only rational path is to leverage low-cost, high-impact asymmetric vectors. This is not a choice. It is a mathematical function of weakness. The blueprint is global. We see it in Washington's stated policy of escalation without collapse against Tehran, a protocol designed to systematically dismantle a state's solvency through economic strangulation, leading to predictable outcomes like mass internal unrest. We see it in reports from Japanese scholars on Chinese information warfare targeting Taiwan, a low-cost method to create internal division and delegitimize a government. The mechanism is identical. Weakness forces a pivot to asymmetry. The math of modern warfare is the primary accelerant of systemic risk. The blueprint for this is not hidden. It is an open-source economic reality. A Royal United Services Institute, RUSI analysis presents the core equation: a $5 million main battle tank versus a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a simple cost-benefit analysis. It is a 10,000 to 1 kinetic cost disparity that fundamentally breaks the logic of conventional deterrence. This imbalance represents the democratization of violence. The capability to neutralize high-value state assets is no longer monopolized by nations with massive industrial and financial capital. Lethal force projection has become an accessible commodity. Any non-state actor or economically strangled nation can now acquire asymmetric lethality for the price of a used car, rendering billions in legacy hardware a systemic liability. For a state like Iran pushed to the edge of a solvency crisis by a protocol of escalation without collapse, this new math is a strategic lifeline. It can no longer afford a symmetric dollar-for-dollar response. It cannot build a carrier group to match a carrier group, but it can afford to field a swarm of low-cost, high-lethality asymmetric assets designed to make a symmetric response financially untenable for its opponent. The barrier to entry for inflicting catastrophic economic and military damage has collapsed. This is the crucial vector. It transforms the calculus for a cornered regime from deterrence to a desperate zero-sum gambit. When facing total systemic collapse, the low kinetic cost makes launching a final, shocking strike not an act of madness, but a mathematically rational lever to force de-escalation on its own terms. The operational theaters for this new era of conflict are not declared on any map. They are designated as gray zones, nations selected as proxy laboratories to refine the protocols of systemic collapse. These are not the primary targets. They are the staging grounds. Reports from entities like CSIS note that warnings of instability from South Africa to Canada are not the cause of global risk. They are the symptoms, the deliberate stress testing of key logistical and commodity hubs to measure the blast radius of economic warfare before it is deployed on a primary adversary. The Iranian file serves as the blueprint for kinetic-free decapitation. The stated policy of escalation without collapse is a clinical term for managed demolition. The objective is to engineer a solvency crisis, triggering internal systemic failure. The resulting protests and state-led violence, with over 2,400 fatalities reported, are not an unforeseen consequence. They are a key performance indicator. This is the quantifiable data point that demonstrates the protocol is working. The state is being forced to liquidate its own social capital to maintain control. Simultaneously, the Taiwan theater is a laboratory for information-based degradation. Japanese scholars warn of a sustained campaign of anti-Taiwan messaging, an asymmetric vector designed to erode national will before a single shot is fired. This mirrors the economic strangulation of Iran. One protocol attacks the balance sheet, the other attacks the national psyche. Both are designed to dismantle the target's ability to resist, making kinetic action a final, desperate move for the cornered state, not the aggressor. This is not chaos. It is a reallocation. As these gray zones are systematically weakened, capital and resources are rerouted. The surge in Mexican mining stocks, driven by a global rush to precious metals, is not a separate event. It is the economic shadow of the dismantling process. RUSI analysts confirm this is a core component of the protocol. Create a crisis in one node of the global system to engineer a calculated boom in another. The instability is the leverage. The resource realignment is the profit. The launch on warning doctrine is not a strategy. It is a systemic trap. The protocol dictates that a nation launches its nuclear arsenal the instant its early warning systems detect an incoming strike. The objective is to guarantee a retaliatory attack before its own missile silos are turned to glass. The critical vulnerability, however, is not the missile. It is the data feed. According to CSIS analysis, command and control networks are the primary vector for initiating systemic failure. A sophisticated cyber attack can blind radar and satellite networks, creating what is known as the fog of digital war. In this engineered blindness, the commander faces a zero-sum choice. Is the blank screen a system error, or is it the prelude to decapitation? The protocol forces the calculation. The absence of data is interpreted as a confirmed attack. The commander is compelled to launch out of fear of losing the entire arsenal, triggering a full kinetic exchange based on a line of code, not an incoming warhead. The stated Washington protocol is escalation without collapse. This is the strategy being field-tested on Tehran. However, internal collapse is not a variable. It is a mathematical certainty under sustained economic and information pressure. Data from Iran showing over 2,400 killed during protests is not a sign of instability. It is a metric of dwindling regime solvency. Asymmetric warfare is a two-way vector. While China deploys anti-Taiwan messaging to degrade resolve non-kinetically, a state being systematically dismantled retains one final, rational option. A cornered state must reintroduce leverage. When all non-kinetic avenues are exhausted, the objective shifts to forcing de-escalation by demonstrating a new, unacceptable cost to the aggressor. According to our USI analyst, this requires a calibration shot, an event with high systemic impact but perfect deniability. The goal is not destruction, but to prove that the cost of continuing the economic strangulation will be paid in the aggressor's own critical infrastructure. It is a launch on warning posture applied to economic warfare. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a temporary but total blackout of a key transoceanic data cable or a major container port in the Western Hemisphere. The event will be attribution impossible, officially blamed on a catastrophic but coincidental systems failure or a non-state actor. It will disrupt supply chains and momentarily freeze a sector of the market, perhaps related to volatile assets like precious metals. This will not be an act of war. It will be a calibration signal, a mathematical proof of concept demonstrating the capability to escalate kinetically if the target's solvency crisis is pushed to its terminal phase.